Mistake number 3. Discussing your case while in jail. Jail phones. You will not be successful arguing that telephone booths and other public places are entitled to Fourth Amendment protection. It is completely legal for law enforcement to listen to and record everything that you are saying on these calls. Katz versus United States. To be fair, there is usually a big sign in the jail visitation room that says, "No reasonable expectation of privacy," or "all calls are being recorded." That is the jail's way of telling you to be smart or suffer the consequences. When your family calls you about the case, you should only discuss things like how everyone misses you, whether your boss will hold your job, whether they can make bail, how the search for an attorney is going, and when your next court date is. If your family starts asking, "Did you do it?" or "I talked to the state's witness and they said that they aren't going to come to court," then you are cruising for a bruising. You should quickly change the subject and tell your family that you don't want to talk about that. You may even have to hang up if they can't take a hint. Otherwise, you can expect a new indictment for intimidating a witness, tampering with evidence, a higher bond, or a CD sitting on a prosecutor's table marked jail phone calls. When in doubt, just pretend like the police are listening to everything you are saying while you're on a jail phone, because they probably are. Other inmates. There is a reason that you've never heard of the cellmate client privilege, because it doesn't exist. You are surrounded by desperate people who really don't give two squirts about you. Even though you may think that your fellow inmates understand what you are going through and that you are all in this together, that doesn't mean that they won't turn state's evidence on you for an extra pair of socks. You should be wary of any inmate that asks for details about your pending case. The best response is to say, "Man, I don't want to get into that." You can always blame your attorney and say, "My lawyer told me not to talk about it with anybody." It's possible that the victim in your case is a relative or friend of an inmate sitting right next to you. Why put yourself in a situation where some bunkmate now wants to mix it up with you? Nothing is gained by getting into the details of your case with other inmates. It's also best not to carry around paperwork showing your charges, so that you don't have to constantly guard it to keep the other inmates out of your business. This is especially true if you are charged with a sex offense. You might as well place a sign on your back that says, "Insert shank here." Plants. It's not just the other inmates that you have to watch out for. The police can place an undercover officer in your cell with the purpose of getting a statement out of you. He may smear some dirt on his face, get assigned as your cellie, and then sit on your bunk and ask, "Hey, are you guilty of what you're accused of? Won't you feel better if you admit it to someone? You can trust me. Is it true? Did you do it?" Okay, so maybe they aren't that obvious, but any similar conversation should make you suspicious. I once had a case where an undercover officer convinced an inmate to confess his sins in prayer. The undercover officer led the man in a group prayer, and after the inmate confessed what he had done, the undercover testified against him using the man's prayer confessions. The confession was not ruled to be confidential under the clergy penitent privilege because the plant did not pretend to actually be a minister, and the confession was made publicly in front of several other people. People may ask, "How do I know if an inmate is trying to do this?" Or how can I tell if an inmate is an undercover officer? Just be quiet. Then you won't have to figure out who is who. Taking legal advice from your cellmate. Some inmates love to tell others how much they know about the legal process, even though they don't have access to any legal research, cases, statutes, rules of procedure, and never passed the bar or even took a legal class. They somehow know more than the people who feed their families as criminal defense attorneys. This inmate's advice is usually worth what you pay for it. Absolutely nothing. At best, you give away a few cigarettes for some legal quackery. At worst, they provide advice that you actually take and suffer from. Unlike what you see in the movies, your attorney doesn't have it out for you, and he or she doesn't give you crappy advice just to screw up your case on purpose. It can sometimes feel natural to complain about your criminal defense attorney. You're in jail and he or she is at home sipping expensive wine in front of a toasty fireplace while not working on your case. That's at least how these jailhouse lawyers tell it. These self-appointed advisors will say things like, "I knew somebody who had the same lawyer as you, and your lawyer did a terrible job on that case." There was no evidence at all that your lawyer still lost. This is just a made-up story so that they can look better by comparison than someone who actually knows the law. The interesting thing about these jailhouse lawyers is that even though they know everything, they haven't chosen to represent themselves in their particular cases. Tell them to eat their own cooking and to quit giving advice that they won't follow themselves. You may be desperate to hear some good news when the person tells you about this one guy who filed some motion that got the charges dismissed in 1 hour. But don't let your circumstances cloud your vision. If this inmate knows how to get out of jail immediately, why is he or she still there? A person with multiple convictions doesn't become a criminal defense attorney any more than a person with multiple health issues becomes a doctor. Besides for the fact that this inmate's legal advice is uninformed, the other problem with seeking advice from an inmate is that you'd have to tell him or her all of the private details about your case before receiving any advice. This, let me give you my legal opinion gimmick, might just be a setup to get a confession out of you so that they can tattle to the prosecutor's office. This person could even be wearing a wire and recording everything you say. Even if you're innocent, it doesn't help to provide the prosecution with a recording of you cursing the person who falsely accused you.